The geometry of the space that you capture with your camera is rectangular. Within this frame here, everything your audience sees will be captured. And it's up to you as the director to think about what they're going to see and where their attention will be focused. Perhaps the best way to frame a shot in a way which immediately connects with your audience is to use something we call the rule of thirds. It's really rather simple. You take that rectangular space and you divide it into thirds, as so. As you can see, there are 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines. If you go and watch practically any TV show or movie, you will probably find that the main actors or featured subjects line up along one of those vertical axes. The reason for that is what the eye intuitively wants to see. You could, for example, frame someone, as you're seeing now, in the dead center of the camera. Such a shot, such a frame implies balance, and that can be a powerful device. But it's not the type of device which is used most of the time. So when you're framing a subject, or indeed framing any environment, try to line objects up along these axes. A horizon directly in the center of a frame is uninteresting. Where is the eye supposed to be drawn? To what's above the horizon or below the horizon? If you were to frame a shot like this, with the horizon lined up along the top 1/3 axis, your attention is drawn to the ground. If you were to instead frame a shot with the horizon lined up along the bottom axis, like this, then your attention, or rather the audience's attention, is drawn to everything above that line. Where do you want your audience's attention to be drawn? Look at how I'm framed in this shot. There's something called head space above me, right? My head isn't touching the top of the frame. If it was, that might imply more of a confined space for your interview subject. That might not be a bad thing. Maybe you don't want headroom. Maybe you want to project an image of confrontation or claustrophobia. But for the most part, some head space is often a good idea. There's also such a thing as looking space, in front of me here. Although you know that the world continues out past beyond the front of this frame, if my nose were to be up against it, like it is now, then you, as the viewer, would really start to feel as if I was in a confined space, as if I wasn't able to look beyond the end of the frame, even though you know that that isn't the case. Already we've learned 3 principles about how to frame a shot. The rule of thirds, headspace, and looking space. The rule of thirds can be applied to subjects like me right now, but it can also be applied to environments. If you want to capture something that we call B-roll, or environmental footage, that's footage of spaces, the places through which people move, use the rule of thirds. If you want to capture interview footage that feels right, use the rule of thirds. Also imply the principles of looking space and head space. If you want to communicate something very specific, then consider breaking those rules. If you have one person in your work whose perspective is more balanced, for example, than everyone else's, and that's what you wish to portray, maybe they should be framed in the centre. If someone is recounting a story in which their freedom of movement is reduced, perhaps headspace and looking room might be reduced or eliminated entirely. These rules are principles. They are laws which can be broken. But if you understand the purpose of those rules, you will be in a position to break them in the way that's most effective in your work. Now that we understand a little bit about looking room, the vertical axis in our rule of thirds model starts to make more sense. Because if you have a subject framed on one axis, like you're seeing me right now, that automatically guarantees, or should, that there is plenty of space into which I can look. Now, the places where these axes intersect is also very, very important. For example, you want to aim to get the eye of your subject roughly in the vicinity of this intersection here. That, by default, is the perfect type of framing for practically any interview subject, practically any setting. Again, you might want to break these rules. You might have very good reason to do so. But knowing what those rules are will allow you to explore them and experiment with them on your own terms.
Okay, well, the Coventry Evening Telegraph, or the Coventry Telegraph as it's called now, is really very typical of a daily newspaper in the UK. I mean, its height in the 80s and 90s, it was selling more than 100,000 copies a day to the population of Coventry and Warwickshire. And it was produced with multiple editions that came out at different times, that were serving different areas.
It's worth remembering that newspapers are also a key source of entertainment from it. You know, they pick up the newspaper and they're interested in sports news. They're interested in what their local football club or boxing club is getting up to. They're also interested in the cartoons. They're interested in aspects of humour, things to brighten up their day or cheer them up.
The Coventry Evening Telegraph was one of the local institutions which helped to define Coventry throughout the 20th century. It was the organ through which this city's story, this city's culture, and all that change over time was recorded, measured, and made known to the general public.
So what we're trying to document is what the impact of those changes are for the people that worked for those newspapers.
I wanted to work for the Coventry Telegraph. That's what I wanted to do. It was as soon as I put my foot in the door, the buzz, the camaraderie, everything that went with the paper was fantastic. The vibe, and it would never be repeated in any newspaper in any part of the country.
Then a job came up at the Coventry Telegraph, so I applied for that and got it, came up for an interview and got the job. And then it was there that I started to find out more about the print and how it was, the paper was put together. what happened was the reporter would write the story, that would go to the news editor who would make a decision about whether to include it or not, and then that would be passed on to the sub-editor to edit the story, put the headlines on and so on. Once the story was edited, it would be taken down to the print room where it was set in hot metal type. The type would then be arranged within what they call the form or the furniture, which was a metal frame holding the page into place. That would be inked up. A page proof would be taken of that inked up page. The sub-editor and possibly the editor would then go over the page to check it for any errors. If it was okay, it would go back to the print room, turned into a flong, which is a papier-mâché page, really. That would be put into a machine and metal put in and turned into a metal plate, a curved metal plate, which would fit onto the presses, and then the print would run through the presses and out would pop the pages.
Normal working day would be, if I was on day shift, you get there about 7:30. Relieve, if they're printing through the night and they got behind, we used to have to go down and relieve the other people so they could get off home. Failing that, it'd be clean the press up, clean everywhere up, and get ready for the first run, which would be any time between 10 and 11 o'clock.
And I was only on the sports desk at the Telegraph. That's what you call a writer stroke sub-editor. I was a sub-editor, mainly. Which means you do the layouts, you rehash the stories, you edit it, as it's said, no. And you get a lot of stuff from Press Association. Because we then take the main parts out of that and rewrite it for local interest. Most of the papers have been done the night before. You go in and, say like today, you go in, you'd be covering the England match. And that would be your a couple of live pages.
The days were never set. You never knew what you were doing from one day to the next because obviously you're working for a newspaper. So you do your shift, you'd go home, and sometimes you'd get that call because I lived in Eastern Green. If anything happened in Eastern Green, you'd get the call. You'd have to go over and do it. So there were no days where you completely switched off unless you took annual leave. But that was part of the buzz as well, because you work for a newspaper. You can't expect to sit down and enjoy watching telly too much.
Were there any memorable editions that you remember, like when City won the cup or anything like that?
Oh yeah, well, that was a smile. That was a terrific. The streets of Coventry were deserted, absolutely deserted. They won the cup in extra time. We got the paper out. That was a memorable day.
How did it affect the paper? Was the paper any different that day? Your work day?
It's with Saturday Pink, people who got to that time they played at Highfield Road, they would go up and watch the game. If they won, they wanted to read about it. If they lost, they wouldn't bother. They'd been at the match, seen every kick, they still wanted to read about it. And the City won 2 or 3 in the trot. Our sales went up.
And a couple of the stories I worked on were quite big stories which created stress, definitely stress during the day. And one of them was the Yorkshire Ripper case. I was on front page when that was coming in, particularly on the one day, and there were literally hundreds of centimetres in hard copy, i.e. typed on paper, coming in. My job was to keep a track of what was happening in the court case. I had a pile of paper in front of me, and as the reports came in, I would have to update the story, put the instructions on, send it out for editing. And at the time, they used to have a thing called a creed, which was like a teleprinter. So all the Press Association information would come through on that. The guys in there would hand that to one of the sub-editors, he would rush it to me, I would look at it, assess it, send it out and all that kind of thing.
It's amazing as well that the amount of stories that you used to cover just working in Coventry. You wouldn't think. I mean, I've got pictures of Bill Clinton, Tony Blair, David Cameron. I've got there's royalty. I don't think there's a member of the royal family I haven't taken a photo of, because at the time we used to have the royal show in Coventry at Stoneleigh. So you'd come along and the Queen would be there, so you took pictures of the Queen. I mean, Bill Clinton flew over because he was at Warwick University. He was there for something or other, and Tony Blair was with him, so we were there doing photos of that, and all sorts of things. The amount of people that came through Coventry, and you know, politicians and everybody. There was just loads. You know, it's amazing. You think you work. You see your portfolio. You think you work for a national paper, and you work for the Coventry Telegraph. I say only. I work for the Coventry Telegraph, but you know the amount of stories you'd cover.
It was teamwork, and obviously you got on with some people better than others, but the whole thing, if people didn't perform their particular role, it held somebody up further along the line.
Enjoyed the whole experience, and I knew. So when I started as a copy boy in Glasgow, you got to know every department, and you got to know someone in the department. Like if in Coventry, if I made a mistake in the hot metal, you think, I'm stuck here. You can't go and say, oh, change that. You say, no, your mistake, son, you're going to get the verification. I always knew somebody in the department who could say, look, I've dropped it. Can you help me out?
Well, it was, because the Telegraph was always close-knit. You know, we looked after ourselves, and everybody knew everybody. You know, you had to watch what you said, because you might upset somebody's brother or auntie, or. But that's the way everybody liked it.
Yeah.
You know, we used to have our fights between ourselves, but it was sorted out there and then, not, you know, let it fester.
And I don't think at the time I realised how privileged, how privileged I was to be working for that paper.
The Telegraph was they liked to take family in.
Yeah.
And I married my wife then, and she got me a job there, got me the interview. Plus I knew a lot of people that worked there through, well, it was nearly 40 years I was, you know, courting and that.
I've never looked back. Coventry's been good to me. Coventry's been good to me. Always been employed. I met my wife, who's now dead. Had my daughter. Got a nice house. Got my granddaughter there. Coventry has been good to me.
But it started with the print room moving. That was the start of the decline. Then the digital era came in. Then the smartphone. There was just events that you could see chiseling away at. The paper isn't going to be quite the same paper as it was. Nothing's the same. Everything's the same. I know that.
Some of the old hands stopped on when they got there was redundancies. You know, when they were swapping over to digital at Coventry. Some of them were old hands and they couldn't get on with the new technology. You know, that they were used to being skilled men.
I think what was changing it is the computerisation, that increasing use of technology, because deadlines was then starting to change to fit what could be done technologically.
Oh, yeah.
So I think the morning, I can't remember exactly what happened now, but the deadlines started to shift. They, I don't think they did quite so many editions and that kind of thing. So there were things were beginning to impact in that way.
Yeah.
The other thing that happened which is not so much the effect of the takeover, but with technology, is jobs started to disappear. You mentioned printers, so printers' jobs, but also other jobs such as proofreaders and people like that, where they literally sat down with two people reading every single line, every full stop, every comma, and would verbalise that. So you'd read the lines, then it'd say stop, open quotes, next paragraph, and it would do. So every single line in spelling was checked. That job went, and it became the role of the sub-editor to check it. Whereas the sub-editor had formerly written the headline, and that was set by the printers with computers. The sub-editor also could write the headline. So all those roles are sort of compressed into the sub-editor's role.
Because of digital, you could get a lot of editions in, like early morning or lunchtime, early afternoon, late city final, and then the final. You know, you could do a lot.
You do 9 different editions. That's quite a lot. And that's a thought better. Because if you sent a folio with a couple of paragraphs on it, it'd take roughly from the time it left your desk to go on the page, it'd take half an hour. Now it's just all done instant on screen. And then that'd be, you get rid of your lunch edition, and you start doing it, you change the whole back page for City. You might change it like for Lake City, you'd update the cricket scores, things like that.
With the newspaper industry at the moment, once the people stop reading the newspapers, they won't go back. You know, it's not like years ago where you had no internet or radio or cable TV. They used to count on it, and now they don't have to.
The Telegraph did move with the times. It certainly did. It certainly did move with the times, but it couldn't control the shift in the paper. The way people just didn't buy papers anymore. The cost went up for the paper, and people stopped buying it. But
so one of the things that's so lovely about these interviews, I think, is not only the recollections you have of the newspaper itself, but also the recollections that you get of life in the city as a result of, you know, the people that talk about.
people still even now, where's your picture going? Is it in the Telegraph? Is it in the Telegraph? It's still got, Telegraph has still got its, some people have a go at it, oh it's this, oh it's that, but I still get it. And the oldies still get it. People used to buy just to get the Telegraph, just for the Hatch, Match and Dispatch. That's all they did. You know, the weddings, the deaths column, and the courts. Some people would just buy the paper to see who was in court, to see if old Joe Bloggs had been done for nicking a tin of spaghetti out of the co-op. People just buy it for so many different things.
Our print was anything up to 80,000 copies, and the last one at the Telegraph, I weren't there because I'd gone over to Birmingham, but I was told, considering it was the last one, 32,000. You know, it's a big lot. I know for a fact we were making £12 million a year. And when we went to Birmingham, they started to struggle, you know. Plus, like, you know, to me it didn't make sense why we were going there. And it's not just me, the people in Birmingham that work for Post and Mail, they said the same. You know, because they swapped theirs to the printing at night and all, and their figures are dropping away.